You're not behind because you were lazy. You're behind because the timeline you were sold, finish school, get stable, build slowly, was designed for a world that no longer exists. And by the time you figured that out, you were already 35 or 40. Or looking at 45 in the mirror, calculating how many productive years you have left. You don't say it out loud. But late at night, the math runs itself in your head. Retirement, your children's education, the gap between where you are and where you were supposed to be by now. It's not anxiety, it's arithmetic, and the arithmetic is brutal. Here's what no one tells you. Starting late is not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is that you're still operating on slow game rules in a world that punishes slow gains with extinction. Machiavelli built an entire philosophy for men in exactly your position, men who had lost time, lost ground, or lost their advantage. What you're about to hear is not motivation. It is a map. And maps are only useful when you're willing to accept exactly where you are right now, not where you wish you'd been. There is a system working against you, and it has been operating since you were a child. It's not a conspiracy. It's something far more dangerous. It's a design. You were taught to trust the gradual. Slow savings, patient investing, compound interest over 40 years. These are not lies exactly. But they are instructions written for someone who started at 22 with no debt, inherited stability, and had the luxury of time as their primary asset. You were handed those same instructions at 22, and then life happened. A failed business, a family emergency, a decade spent building someone else's dream in a corporation that restructured you out, a country where opportunity moved slower than the syllabi suggested it would. And now you're standing here, holding instructions that were never written for you, wondering why the formula isn't producing results. Machiavelli understood this exact trap. He watched men in 15th century Florence follow inherited rules, old codes of honor, old hierarchies of patience, while faster, colder men dismantled them without sentiment. He wrote that a man who clings to the methods of yesterday will be destroyed by the conditions of today. Not because the old methods were wrong, because time itself had shifted and the methods had not. That is your situation. Time has shifted. Your methods cannot stay the same. There was a time, and this is universally true for men who feel this pressure, when waiting felt responsible, careful, mature, until the morning you realized that waiting had become its own form of surrender. Machiavelli had no sympathy for that realization being slow, but he had a great deal of respect for what a man does with it once it arrives. In 1901, John D. Rockefeller was 62 years old and had already built Standard Oil into the largest private enterprise in American history. Most people know that story. What they don't know is that his actual period of compounded acceleration, the phase where his wealth doubled, tripled, and quadrupled, did not begin at 30. It began in his late 40s. Rockefeller spent his 30s and early 40s consolidating, eliminating competition, building pipelines of both oil and influence. He made almost no public-facing moves. He was quiet, deliberate, and surgically patient, not about wealth accumulation, but about positioning. By 55, the positioning was complete. And what followed was not slow compound growth. It was an avalanche. He didn't start late, technically, but the mechanism he used, deep positioning before visible movement, is exactly what a man who has started late must weaponize. Because here is the truth. A man who starts at 40 with clarity destroys a man who started at 22 with confusion. Every single time. Speed matters, but direction matters more. And that is where Machiavelli's advice for late starters begins. Machiavelli wrote that a man who cannot win by force must win by cunning. And what he meant was not dishonesty. He meant geometry. When you cannot outrun someone, you don't run faster. You change the angle entirely. Most men who feel they've started late try to compress the timeline. They work harder, longer, more frantically. They add hours. They add stress. What they don't add is a different axis. Here's what that looks like practically. A man at 38 who tries to compete directly with 25-year-olds in their own market, on their own platforms, with their own energy, he loses. Not because he's less capable, because he's playing a youth game with an adult's obligations and an adult's energy ceiling. But that same man, at 38, has something no 25-year-old can manufacture: pattern recognition, scar tissue from failure. A network, however imperfect, that a young man hasn't had time to build. Authority that comes not from credentials, but from visible time in the field. Change the angle. Stop competing on speed. Compete on depth. Depth cannot be faked. Depth cannot be bought. And in a market flooded with loud, fast, shallow operators, depth is the rarest asset available. Men who win after starting late don't catch up. They redirect. They find a lane where age is leverage, not liability. Speed is a young man's weapon. Angle is yours. Machiavelli was blunt on this point. Excessive caution is not wisdom. It is cowardice wearing a suit. One of the most consistent patterns in men who started late and still built significant wealth is that they eliminated waiting in every form they could control. Not recklessness. Elimination of artificial lag. What does that mean in your life right now? It means that every slow, bureaucratic, permission-seeking layer between you and your next move is costing you months you cannot afford to lose. You don't need to announce your plans. You need to execute them. You don't need the perfect credential before you pitch the client. You need to pitch the client while pursuing the credential simultaneously. You don't need your family to understand your strategy before you implement it. You need results, and results generate understanding faster than any explanation ever will. A man with 10 years of runway thinks slowly. A man with 5 years of runway thinks differently. You are a man with a compressed timeline. That compression, if you let it, will kill your performance through anxiety. But if you channel it correctly, if you treat it as a forcing function rather than a threat, it sharpens every decision you make. Urgency, chosen consciously, is an accelerant. Urgency felt as panic is a paralytic. Slow men ask for permission. Fast men seek forgiveness, rarely needed, because results arrived first. Here is where most late starters hemorrhage their advantage before they even begin. They look at what they don't have: time, capital, youth, energy. They construct an entire identity around the deficit, and from that identity, every subsequent decision is tainted. They negotiate poorly because they feel weak. They price themselves low because they feel behind. They accept bad terms because they believe any terms are better than none. Machiavelli watched this exact failure in Florence. Men of genuine capability who entered negotiations having already conceded in their own minds. He wrote that a prince who enters a war already believing he might lose has already lost. Not metaphorically, literally. Belief precedes outcome, not the other way around. So before you move, before you make a single strategic decision about your next financial chapter, sit down and conduct an asset audit with the coldness of a stranger evaluating your life from the outside. What do you know that a younger man doesn't? Which industries have you operated in? Which relationships still carry your name with respect? Which skills are so deeply embedded in you that they feel invisible? Invisible to you, but extraordinary to someone who doesn't have them. Most men in their late 30s and 40s are sitting on top of assets they have completely misevaluated. They have underpriced themselves so consistently for so long that they've forgotten the price was arbitrary to begin with. You set your price. You always did. You just let someone else convince you what the correct number was. Audit your assets like you're about to sell a business you've spent 2 decades building. Because that's exactly what you're doing. This is the rule most men who feel behind refuse to execute, because executing it requires something that social conditioning has spent your entire life suppressing: the willingness to disappoint people who are not helping you build. Machiavelli said, "A prince who fears to offend the people he must leave behind will never move." He knew that advancement and sentiment are natural enemies. Not eternal enemies, but enemies during the movement phase. Look at your current environment with forensic clarity. Who in your immediate circle, family, friends, colleagues, consumes your time and emotional bandwidth without contributing any measurable return to your ambitions? Not people you love. Not people who deserve your loyalty. Specifically, people who create drag. People who dismiss your plans. People whose crises somehow always arrive the week you have your most important meetings. People who, even without malice, exist in a frequency that pulls you back to average. You cannot afford average anymore. You don't have the years to recover from environments that normalize staying still. This doesn't require dramatic confrontation. It doesn't require announcement or explanation. It requires quiet, systematic reduction of access. Less availability. Less disclosure of your plans. Less emotional investment in outcomes that don't intersect with your direction. Machiavelli would call this a strategic withdrawal of energy. Most people call it becoming distant. You'll know it's working when your thinking gets cleaner, your decisions get faster, and the noise level in your own head drops to something manageable. Dead weight doesn't feel heavy on any single day. It simply ensures you never rise to the altitude you're capable of. There is a trap that specifically hunts men who feel behind. It is the trap of diversification before mastery. Because you feel the pressure of time, you try to build multiple income streams simultaneously. A side business here, a trading account there, a freelance skill you're half developing, an online course you started and never finished, 4 browsers open, 12 tabs each, 3 notebooks with half-written plans. This feels productive. It is not productive. It is the architecture of permanent mediocrity. Machiavelli warned against serving too many masters. He was writing about political loyalty, but the principle is identical in economics. A man who divides his attention across 10 opportunities captures none of them fully. He becomes a generalist in a world that pays specialists obscene amounts of money. Pick one vehicle. 1. Not your favorite idea. Your most executable idea. The one that intersects your deepest competence with an actual market willing to pay. And then go so deep into that single thing that you become one of 100 people on Earth who can do it at your level. Depth in one area generates income that funds diversification later. Diversification before depth is just expensive confusion with better branding. A man who is exceptional at one thing commands his price. A man who is adequate at many things competes on rate. And rate competition is a race you cannot win when someone younger, somewhere cheaper, is willing to undercut you indefinitely. Master the one. Then expand from a position of dominance, not desperation. Rockefeller didn't attack markets. He prepared terrain, then walked in when the ground was ready. This distinction between attacking and positioning is the one most late starters miss entirely because they've finally gotten hungry, and hunger makes people impatient. Machiavelli wrote that before any campaign, a prince must understand not only what he wants, but what currently stands between him and the thing he wants. Not theoretically, concretely. Named obstacles, named competitors, named gatekeepers. Before you launch anything, a new business, a pivot in career, a major investment, map the terrain. Who holds power in the space you're entering? What do they protect? Where are the gaps they've left uncovered because they're too comfortable to notice? Who are the allies available to you before you make your first public move? Most men move publicly before they've positioned privately. They announce intentions to people who don't wish them well. They ask for advice from competitors wearing the mask of mentors. They enter rooms without understanding the existing hierarchy, and then wonder why they're ignored, underestimated, or outmaneuvered. Position means relationship capital secured before you need it. Position means reputation deliberately cultivated in the right rooms. Position means your first visible move arriving into an environment already tilted in your direction. You have one shot at each first impression in each new arena. Men who prepare that impression own the room. Men who improvise it spend years recovering from it. Move once. Move correctly. Position first, always. Pay attention to this one, because it will save you from one of the most common ways men sabotage themselves in the critical early stages of a new direction. When you feel the charge of a new plan, when something finally clicks and you can see the path, the impulse is to tell people, to describe the vision, to explain the reasoning, to get validation that yes, this is a good idea, yes, you should pursue it. Machiavelli had contempt for this behavior. He understood that verbalizing a plan before executing it creates a psychological release that mimics the feeling of progress without producing any of the results. You feel as though you've moved forward. You have not moved at all. You've simply spent the fuel of your excitement before the engine needed it. And worse, every person you tell becomes a variable you cannot control. Not necessarily hostile, simply present. Their doubt, their questions, their unsolicited warnings all become noise inside a mind that needed silence to execute. There is also this. People who would not help you succeed have a specific interest in knowing your plans. They cannot obstruct what they cannot see. The men who built real leverage, silently, systematically, all share one consistent characteristic. They were boring to talk to before they were impressive to observe. They spoke about what had already been done. Never what was about to be attempted. Talk after results. Every single time, results speak for themselves, and more importantly, results speak to the right people. Here is a refrain that will restructure how you use every hour remaining. Stop thinking in years and start thinking in blocks. A man who believes he has 20 productive years thinks in decades. He defers. He plans. He waits for clarity before committing. He loses those 20 years to preparation. A man who compresses those 20 years into 90-day execution blocks, where each block has a specific, measurable, non-negotiable output, produces more in 4 years than most men produce in 20. Machiavelli was not a patient man. He wrote from a prison cell, exiled, stripped of political power, with what he believed were only years left before his irrelevance became permanent. And in that constraint, he produced The Prince, one of the most consequential manuscripts in human history. Constraint did not slow him. Constraint clarified him. Your age is not a countdown. It is a filter. It removes everything that used to distract you when you thought you had infinite time. The social politics, the comparison to peers, the waiting for perfect conditions. All of that falls away when you finally accept the specific arithmetic of your situation. 90 days, one output, full commitment. Then the next 90 days. Men who started late and built empires did not do it gradually. They did it in focused explosions of execution, separated by brief recalibration, not years of slow build. Quarterly detonations of output. Map your next 90 days tonight. Not vaguely, with deliverables, with deadlines, with consequences you've assigned to yourself for failure to execute. A man who imposes his own urgency owns his future. A man who waits for external urgency is permanently reactive. Most men treat their social lives and their financial lives as completely separate domains. This is not a personal failure. It is a class-level instruction that keeps certain people from accessing the actual mechanism of wealth creation. Wealth, at every level above the subsistence line, is transferred between people who trust each other. Not between strangers with impressive credentials, between people inside webs of mutual earned trust. Machiavelli understood that a prince without allies is simply a man with a title, and he was ruthlessly specific about what genuine alliances looked like versus what performative alliances looked like. Genuine alliances produce leverage. Performative alliances produce the feeling of network while delivering none of the actual benefits. You need to audit your relationships the same way you audited your assets, not sentimentally. Architecturally, who in your network has access to deals you cannot see from where you stand? Who has the trust of people you need to meet? Who moves in rooms where the real decisions happen, not the announced ones, but the ones made before the announcement? These relationships are not built through aggressive networking. They're built through demonstrated usefulness over time. You find out what someone needs that you can provide without cost to yourself, and you provide it before asking for anything. You do this consistently, selectively, and without announcing your strategy. Robert Greene called this strategic generosity. Machiavelli called it being indispensable without being obvious. The outcome is identical. You become someone people protect, because protecting you serves their interests. Relationships are infrastructure. And like all infrastructure, they must be built before you need them, not during the emergency. This is the rule that unlocks everything above it, because without it, everything above it sits on a foundation of quiet shame. You have internalized a definition of late that was given to you by people who are not thinking about your specific life. 35 is late by the standards of someone who peaked at 28 and built their entire identity around that timing. 40 is late by the calendar of a culture that front-loads praise and back-loads opportunity. Neither of those measures is relevant to you. Machiavelli was dismissed, imprisoned, and exiled at 43. He wrote The Prince at 44. Stan Lee created his first successful comic at 39. Samuel L. Jackson got his first major film role at 43. Vera Wang entered the fashion industry at 40. Harlan Sanders, who you know as Colonel Sanders, franchised Kentucky Fried Chicken for the first time at 62 after decades of failure in businesses most people never hear about. These are not motivational anecdotes. They are data points that dismantle a specific lie that your best productive decades are behind you. Late, by Machiavelli's measure, is not an age. Late is a condition. And the condition is not about time, it is about decision. A man is late when he has stopped moving. A man in motion at any age is not late. He is simply at a different point in a race that does not end until he decides it ends. Stop measuring yourself against a timeline someone else drew. Draw your own, then execute against it with the cold precision of someone who knows exactly what they're building and exactly how much they're done apologizing for the pace at which they started. There is one final behavioral pattern that kills late starters before they ever gain momentum, and it is this: the need for someone qualified to tell them they're on the right track before they commit fully. They want a mentor to approve the plan, a successful peer to confirm the direction, a family member to believe in the vision. And until that validation arrives, they hold back 5%, 10%, just enough to preserve the ability to say, I wasn't really trying if it fails. Machiavelli called this the most dangerous form of cowardice because it disguises itself as prudence. It looks like wisdom to wait for a second opinion. It looks like maturity to not move until you're certain. What it actually is a man protecting his ego at the direct expense of his future. Results do not arrive in stages, proportionally scaled to how much you believed in yourself. They arrive, or they don't, based on how completely you committed to the execution. You will get the validation after the result, never before it. And the men who demanded it before were never the ones who produced it. Commit completely. Then observe. Adjust what doesn't work with the same coldness you would apply to a business problem, without ego, without grief, without the need for anyone to confirm that you were right to try. The men who understand this don't seek approval. They generate evidence. Everything you heard in this video is available in books that cost less than a meal. Machiavelli is free to read. Sun Tzu is free. Robert Greene's work is in every library in the world. The information is not hidden. What's hidden is the permission to take it seriously when you're not 22 years old and the world keeps handing you frameworks designed for men who still have everything ahead of them. There is an entire layer of strategy that exists beyond what you just heard, and it concerns not how to build from where you are, but how to protect what you build once momentum arrives. Because the attack on a man in motion is different from the attack on a man still standing still. The threats shift. The wolves change. The game itself changes character once you've removed yourself from the average. That is a different conversation. And it is not for everyone. The men who watch this far are not looking for comfort. They are not looking for someone to tell them it's going to be fine. They already know that fine is a trap, a word used by people who have accepted a ceiling they were handed rather than a ceiling they chose. You did not come here for fine. That is the only thing that separates you from the men who clicked away in the first 30 seconds. That separation is not small. It is everything.